Hello and welcome to Sensei Podcast. This is Manos Brilakis discussing with leaders in the field of CTO and complex PCI. Sensei means teacher or master in Japanese. The goal of the Sensei Podcast is to help you learn and improve in CTO and complex PCI so that you can become the best that you can be and offer your patients the best possible results. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sensei Podcast. It is my great pleasure to introduce for the first time a CTO team. We always talk about having people work together and learn together and do cases together, and actually this is the first time we'll bring them both at the same time. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Brian Jefferson, who is leading the CTO and Complex Intervention Program at Centennial Health in Nashville, Tennessee, and also Dr. Taral Patel, who is doing the same thing at HonorHealth in Scottsdale in Arizona. They used to be together, but then Taral had to move down for family reasons. So welcome both, and it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks. Great to be here. Excellent.
Thanks for having us, Manos.
Yeah,
happy to do it.
So let me dive right in. How did you two get together in the first place, and how did you decide to do CTOs and became such a great team?
I'll let Taral tell most of that story, but we actually knew each other from fellowship. And I was practicing in Tennessee, and I think fate kind of brought us together at the right time. So, Taral, you want to go ahead and tell that story?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, we did know each other from fellowship from the clinic, from the Cleveland Clinic. We were in different classes and knew each other from there. And I'd initially looked in Tennessee, but they didn't have any jobs at the time. But eventually made my way over there, and I was starting there with the practice, and Brian had already by then established himself and was fairly busy. And I said, "Hey, are you doing structural?" And he said, "No, I'm not doing structural. We got a guy who's going to do structural. He's going to be our structural guy." And I was like, "Well, me neither. What do you want to do? You're pretty busy. I'm getting into this." I'm thinking about doing CTOs. I've had an interest for a while. I had a few patients along the way that really, were orphaned and, kind of left by others because they couldn't treat it. And so that always got me interested. And then I trained in Mid-America. So, I kind of hoodwinked Brian into getting into CTOs because you got to get into this with me because you've been established, you've got the reputation. They're going to look at me and think I'm crazy for wanting to do this. So you're going to have to be the kind of senior leader here and, give me cover while we embark on this. So that's how we kind of got into it.
And then how did you guys get trained? And was it going through courses, getting proctors? How did it start?
Yeah, that's interesting now that there are a lot of complex fellowships and, tracks available. I was just talking about this the other day to some of our partners about how, and you've kind of started down that trek after your fellowship also. And so, when I was getting out of into practice for a couple of years, I actually thought maybe I took the wrong track because I wasn't interested in structural. EP seemed to have a lot of stuff going on. Drug-eluting stents had been out for a couple of years, and it just seemed we were kind of doing kind of routine stenting, and our training was probably similar in a lot of ways, although I think Mid-America was a little ahead of the Cleveland Clinic when we were doing CTO, but a lot of that was me sitting with Pat Whitlow at 12 a.m. on a Friday night, doing a lot of antegrade wire escalation and wanting to get the heck out of there. And so, when I left the clinic, the last month I was there, actually, we had a group of the Japanese operators come over, and I watched the retrograde PCI for the first time, and Irving Franco was the senior staff at the clinic. It was really hard to please, and I remember we got done, and he's like, that was something different, and I was just sort of blown away by it. And then as the community increased, Taral and I starting our program went down kind of the things that were available at that time. So CTO Essentials programs, Master's course, and really actually through the mentorship of the community and just our partnership and friendship really that grew out of that, and being able to kind of talk each other through a tough case or be there, or call Tony DiMartini on the phone at 8 p.m. and let him pick up, really kind of taught us how to go about it, and that was just dive in, and when you need help, phone a friend. And so we
Oops. Did we lose Brian?
It looks like it.
Yeah. Okay, I can pick up there. So we got Nick Lembo was our first proctor. Unfortunately, the lab flooded that day. So, so we had one case that day. So Nick was not able to help us much. But then Tony came a couple of times. Aaron came to proctor us, and Dimitri. So Dimitri came to proctor us, and they were all amazing. I think Tony had kind of imbued in us the phone a friend option of being stuck in the middle of the case and just calling them up, cold calling them and saying, "Hey, we're here. What do we do?" And he would. The three or four times we called him, he got us through every time. I mean, he couldn't even see what we were doing, but he could imagine it in his mind's eye, and he got us through it. But we did it that way. We did the courses and the CTO Essentials, and went to a couple of courses, and then just up from there. So yeah, that's
Perfect. And then, Taral, it looks like you're both very fortunate, I guess, to train already from the beginning at programs that had a lot of track record and kind of the initial sites, right? The initial powerhouses in City of PCI, both Cleveland Clinic and Mid-America were the pioneers, with Pat Whitlow, as you said, with
So
Edwin Grantham.
Yeah, honestly, Manos, when I was there, so Barry Rutherford was our CTO guy. And then it was really, like as Brian said, Barry was a giant, just like Pat Whitlow. He's phenomenal. But it was all integrate wire escalation. And so watching Barry, wire 3 or 4 wires through a write was very similar to what Brian's experience with Whitlow is like. You're just sit there, your second scrub on a 3.5 hour case where you might get through a write, and sometimes you get into the RV marginal, a distal RV marginal or small PDA. And honestly, at the end of my Mid-America fellowship, I was almost ready to say, forget this, I'm not doing this. This is nuts. Why would anybody want to do this? Imdor and Renexa are perfectly good. But similarly to what Brian had expressed, Sato, one of the Japanese operators, came over and did a retrograde, and came out of it, formed a new write, and I was absolutely blown away. I was like, "This is this is something very different." And Grantham. So Grantham was kind of there too for that, and you could see that's when he started. So Aaron at that point had started to take over the program. So I get to watch Aaron do his first couple of CTOs before he was the Aaron Grantham we know today. So it's pretty cool. But I was sworn against it, and then just patient care and running into patients who really needed the therapy and would benefit from it is kind of what changed my mind.
Wonderful. And then, Brian, so how did the chemistry go? You obviously knew each other from early on, but for something like this to work, you do need to have a good understanding, right, between each other, because it's long cases and stressful cases. So how was that? Just you're always friends, and this made you even more friends? How did that pan out?
Yeah, I think we were always friendly, but this actually was something, and some of it's just luck and personalities, the right place at the right time. But it always actually, it just, everything hit perfectly. So I think that I think both of us had the same interest, which was, taking care of patients that really didn't have options. And I think that was very rewarding for both of us. And then I think actually going through the journey together with the right person who can read each other. And we do that in our personal lives too. I mean, we've gone through a lot of changes and career growth, and even in the practice, how the practice has evolved. When our practice started, I think when Taral joined our practice, we were maybe 10 or 15 people across the city. And now I think when he finally moved away, we were about 40. And so, both of us developing our personal practices, our personal lives as we kind of grew in our families, were coming along also. I think it was just that friendship actually that worked out, and some of that's luck. I mean, right place, right time, and so I do think that both of us having a professional career that was growing and kind of thriving at the same time really made it rewarding, that we kind of fed on it, and so if an opportunity came up for a talk at a meeting and I couldn't do it or he couldn't do it, we just subbed it off to the other person. And I think we just had a very good relationship and still do in that setting where we kind of thrive on each other's personal success, both in and out of the medicine.
And then how did you divide? Who was first? Who was second? Did you alternate? How did you decide on who does what during the case?
It kind of initially just came as whoever's patient it was would be first operator, and but it became almost seamless. Like we could predict what the other person was thinking, and you get into a phase, Manos, this where one person is the first operator usually is doing all this stuff, and at some point fatigue sets in and you don't want to think anymore. You're stuck, you're just fiddling away. And so what the second person really becomes is okay, you're going to do the thinking, I'm going to do the doing. So the second person is like, okay, you need to stop what you're doing because you're not getting anywhere. Let's move on. Let's put a time limit on this. Efficiency is kind of the name of the game, in one sense. And so, we always talk about getting into a failure mode and then moving to the next step. And so there is a tendency, especially when you're starting off, to just get stuck and keep doing the same thing because you think eventually it's going to work. It's going to work. The wire's going to go. And so it takes the second person to be like, okay, stop what you're doing because you're not making any progress. It's been 10 minutes. We need to move forward. So the second operator kind of becomes the thinker. And so that's how it evolved. And we would kind of get referrals from within our practice, and then even starting outside our practice, and so but generally we would troubleshoot the cases together. When we started out, every single case was reviewed together, and as we progressed, we started getting away from that a little bit and just started the cases, and then getting stuck in having the other person come in and bail the other person out. So.
And then, did your practice give you a hard time? Because sometimes, I know, like in many practices, people are pressed for time and lap time and everything, right? So having two operators tied up in the same case can be a little challenge. So how did that work out for you?
Yeah, we've never really had an issue with that, which was, to a credit of kind of our local system and even HCA to some extent, as much as we want to always complain about administration for various reasons, because it's just day-to-day is hard, but medicine's hard. I'll say that when we came, and brought the idea forward, there was never any resistance. I think they viewed it as a potential growth opportunity for the system and for our patients. And so really never really received any kind of resistance to it. In fact, part of Taral's kind of initial contract was to carve out protected time because we knew we were going to tie up one or the other person. And so they were very good about that. I think if you have a good idea and you can kind of make a case for it, it's usually not a lot of resistance initially. And so we never really had an issue with that. And I think as we started having success and the practice saw how the growth of the PCI volume, because when this was going on initially, I think around the country, most places were seeing kind of a contraction of volumes of PCI. And we were actually, when we were looking at our numbers and that time, we were actually growing. And part of that growth was not just the CTO book of business that was coming in, but there was kind of a halo effect of that, of the surgical turn down or just complex PCI. And really, I think a lot of that evolved into our SOC program because we were getting a lot of very sick referrals that were surgical turn downs. And that kind of grew in that direction. And so I think as the group and the system saw growth in PCI, as like I said, other places were slowing down or contracting, I think it became a very good argument that this was working. And even HCA, started the complex PCI working group on a national level to really try to look at other markets where they could grow that same book of business.
Wonderful. And then, how did you on the logistics? How did it go about the planning? Were you guys sitting together looking at the angiograms with the team? How did you actually roll it out on a practical level?
Yeah, we like as I said, before we reviewed kind of each angiogram, and we would do it kind of well before the case was even scheduled. A lot of times in the beginning, because obviously we had access to the same system even if we were at different hospitals that day, so we could sit and talk, by phone, and then also review the morning of the strategy with ourselves, and kind of go through the algorithm. And then Brian, as he said, was at Centennial full time, so he was kind of instrumental, and I'll let him take over that part in kind of recruiting a couple of techs to really become passionate. We had some really good techs, and unfortunately, with the pandemic and everything, all the cath labs got decimated, and a lot of people went traveling, and so as with most places, we kind of lost a lot of our folks, but he's still got a pretty strong team. Brian, you want to tell him about Kelly and some other folks who you've got?
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. We we're very early on advocating for a lot of our techs that had interest in kind of this special part of interventional cardiology, just like a lot of structural teams have dedicated staff, and we really tried to develop that part of the program to advocate for people that wanted to be in the cases and weren't looking at those crazy guys doing like a 4-hour case, every couple of days and tying up the lab. And better than anyone that building a team is really instrumental to the success of a program. I will say, when we looked through the pandemic, we did lose some staff, but kind of our core group stayed together. And actually, when the hospital looked at turnover in departments that somehow managed to maintain better staffing than other areas, our cath lab was a part of that. And I think having that team-based approach kept a lot of people around when they could have moved to other, more lucrative kind of travel positions. A lot of our staff ended up, when they leave, ended up in kind of local industry, which drives people crazy, but we always kind of wear it as a badge of honor that, they're the highly recruited ones, actually end up being some of our better referrings because they're out, beating the bushes in the community and doing a lot of coverage of other places, and say, hey, why don't you send a Taral back at Centennial? He can handle this. And so I think that really it was important to have a kind of a core team. Our mid-level support, knows how to take in referrals and how to communicate, back and really support some of those things that the details get lost when you have a busy practice. And so it's kind of really an entire package that kept everything together.
And actually, we don't really talk much about it, Brian, as you said, but it is true that having a great team makes your life easier, success gets higher, the stress is less. So did you just, how did you find these people? Were you just identify people who are good to their skills? Did you just encourage someone to more on this? Or how did you build a team of the techs that you worked with?
Yeah, when I look at kind of the core people that have been around, there's some self-gravitation of those people that the best tech, are as intellectually curious as many of us. Boston, for the longest time, it's been a couple of months since they've done it. They do the live courses and the streaming of those courses around the country, and we tuned into those, and I still do when I see them, especially if I traveling. I always put it on my calendar. If I'm free when it pops up, I always log on. And I think one of the funniest things, there's a woman who's been with our program for about 10 years who just left for industry. We've encouraged that because I think she was always curious about it. But I would log on to these cases and she was logged on already. And she would watch these on her own time, had the same calendar, invite that I did. And I think that really speaks to, that when I would say if somebody's expressing interest you need to foster and encourage that, no matter whether they're your tech, your nurse, your medical assistant in the office, because I think most of the people that are taking care of patients in whatever venue are wanting to do better. And so if they're expressing interest or questions, I mean, taking time and pausing and making sure you're providing those answers and the resources, that they can get better, really raises that clinic or in the hospital or kind of whatever. And so I will say a lot of the best people on our team are all sort of self-selected. They kind of slowly crept into the cases, and anybody that added value is not going away. So we just keep them around and try to open up opportunities, whether industry sponsored courses or the hospital helped us send a couple of our techs to the CTO course in New York. And so any kind of thing that we can do to offer opportunities for personal growth outside of us just doing, teaching at the bedside, we try to do.
This again, this perfect. And you say actually going to industry is actually a sign of progress rather than, I know it's frustrating to lose them, but at the same time, it shows that you do a great job on building them up. Do you have any memorable cases that, being together really made a difference?
Taral?
Yeah, they're definitely are. Fortunately at Monos, as you know, and I hate to lead with this, but the complications always stand out in your mind as those are the ones you learn from. And I will say what's interesting is sometimes I keep a log of the cases we've done, and and I have a little database of them. And so, at least when I was in Nashville, and even here, once in a while I would just I'd have to load the thing into the computer, and something would ring a bell. And I'd look at that case and be like, "Man, that was a really really great case." Like the first few retros we did. I think the first retro that I had done, that I was primary, Brian was assisting, was this, like he said, this 3.5-4 hour ordeal with a super calcified mid-right that I finally got retro through. And, we got through it. It was painful. We called Tony a couple of times. But in the end, couldn't modify the calcium. So we were unsuccessful stenting it. And I just remember back then, talk about like we talk about we have the supportive team, and we do. There was one person, the cath lab director at the time, who was there for about, I don't know, Brian, 9 months, a year. She didn't last very long, but she kind of comes in the middle of this ordeal, and she's like, "You guys have to stop right now. It's been 3.5 hours." And Brian's like, "What are you talking about? He's got a wire retrograde in the mid right. He's not stopping. He's going to keep going. There's no place to stop." So that was kind of a memorable case, just because we now chuckle. Like at the time, I was like, "Is she going to make this a huge thing?" But that was the wonderful part about HCA, is they really did support our ability to do that. And so even with some of those struggles, you remember that there was a perforation that's kind of memorable. But I think there was one of the memorable ones, I'll let Brian take over, was when we first, the trust the knuckle mantra was there, but Brian got through this horribly tortuous right retrograde, and he still got it and presents it at talks. You remember that knuckle retro right where it just like you could just see, like, that's when it first dawned on you that, okay, this is what trust the knuckle means, because he got through this absolutely tortuous right where the anatomy was totally ambiguous, and the only way to get through that was with a knuckle. And you remember that case, Brian?
Oh yeah, vividly. Yeah, I still see him in clinic, and he's probably one of the more grateful people. That was one that when you looked at the angio, the distal right looked like it was about a 1.5 millimeter vessel. People would be like, "Why are you ever doing this?" And dense ischemia, terrible symptoms, multiple admissions, and hasn't really been back in the hospital really for anything major. But about 7 years after, had a short segment restenosis of the stent that we treated, and I still see him in clinic. It's actually one of the more gratifying cases, but it is one of those where the knuckle almost looked like it was doing a 360 loop in the middle of the right for the antegrade knuckle, and I was just like, there's no way you could ever do this, just trying to stick a wire down, and that clearly was one of the more memorable for me, for sure. Now I agree, the the complications stand out. And when I say what is the best and what is the worst, I think they might be together. We had a complication in somebody that was an early referral from a partner who I met the day of the procedure, who ended up having a pretty serious complication on it. What was a fairly innocuous case, really shouldn't have been a major perf, ended up kind of not being it was one of those post cabbage, very difficult to get, you know, pericardial effusions, was loculated and had a very poor outcome. And I just remember that that changed my practice in the setting of these are different and higher risk patients that and are elective. And so at that point, it was, listen, we're never doing this really on the fly. We really need to have full informed consent with patients and kind of making sure we're doing things completely for the right reasons. It still was for the right reason at that time, but it was one of those that I definitely felt like I didn't have as much of a relationship with the patient initially that I tend to try to develop when I'm really going over a case and, learning about why we're doing this, because they can't walk to see something in their family, or the symptoms really are limiting their quality of life. And so it definitely changed kind of how I approach my pre-evaluation of the patient, making sure that we have a good relationship, before we dive into kind of a complex case.
Perfect. Well, again, as you said, that's true, I guess, for every complex case, it's important to have, because things happen randomly and you don't know which case is going to be the bad one and which not. So this is perfect. Now, switching gears a little bit, how do you keep, these are complex cases, having the support of each other obviously helps. How can you actually keep yourselves in good shape and to be able to do these cases? Do you do any exercise, any other things that make you stay active and feeling good during these challenging cases?
Taral's probably going to give me trouble about Peloton. I was like, I feel like I was an early adopter. Somehow I got that thing before it took off. In fact, I went to the Peloton studio during CTO Essentials. I have some selfies I took with the initial instructors about 7 or 8 years ago. And wow. So I'm a fan of that, but I do think it's really important on that aspect of kind of both physical and mental care, because what we do is stressful, both emotionally and physically. And so I do feel that having some kind of a healthy outlet for stress is really important. And so I do, even when busy, try to maintain at least some type of a basic exercise, whether that's stretching or, just doing something, several days a week at minimum, but almost every day. And I do feel like that gives me an outlet of a way to just kind of escape. And so, and now everybody in the lab during the pandemic everybody got a bike. So we had, we had our own group tag, and so the Peloton became more of a cultural thing in the lab during the pandemic.
Did you convince Taral as well, or?
I'm not.
He gave me so much trouble about
it. I think he had stock in the company, but I think the stock's gone down significantly. So maybe, but no, I was never a fan of sitting there on a bike and virtually doing this. So I was not convinced. But I do other. I have to go to a gym where there's other people and I feel pressured and look at them and be like, I need to be better at what I do. So that's I have to do that. So I do, as you get, closer to kind of middle age, you do worry about that stuff a lot more. And so I've, shifted my workouts to doing kind of more core strengthening exercises and making sure that I can kind of wear the lead. Hopefully eventually we'll be, away from lead more and more with these radiation protection things. But it is a concern that I worry about a lot more. And so I do try to take better care of myself and do some core strengthening. And I think during a case, staying, kind of mentally sharp is still difficult. I mean, after, nearly 10 years of this, it's still pretty hard. I think we were really blessed and fortunate to have each other to get us through those tough times. And so even here, I have a younger partner, Dr. Ankur Gupta, who's trained by Cal Alaswad, who's here with me. And so similarly, I kind of lean on him a little bit. He leans on me in the middle of case to come in and, just do some relief pitching, and kind of somebody come in fresh in the middle who's not struggled with the case, to kind of help out, pitch in, and do the mental strengthening, because it can be very tedious, so. Yeah, I mean, and I still call Brian during case, if I'm really stuck.
Yeah,
So,
same.
And then, do you have any favorite books or favorite movies?
Well, we have the manual of CTO PCI, of course, Mono.
You've been brainwashed. I don't know.
We've been brainwashed. Yeah, of course, that's my favorite.
No, that's a good. It's a good read.
How about any favorite movies or non-medical books, actually?
So,
no, I'm a pretty. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Brian.
I'm a pretty avid reader, so it's sort of asking what your favorite child is, and you can't really do that. But I always enjoy reading things that my kids were reading, kind of as they were getting older. And my wife is totally make me look like an amateur reader because she can read fast and retain. But I always find that it's always interesting to read things outside of medicine. So I've kind of multiple genres of what I like to read, honestly. But again, it does get into trying to name a single, child as your favorite, which I can't do. So
yeah. I will say right now, mine is more kind of dependent on what's recent. So I can kind of name my favorite that'll be here for a while until I have a new favorite. So it switches, obviously, and I think that happens. But right now, The Martian is actually one of my favorite books and movies. So I'm a space geek. I was an aerospace engineer before I did this nonsense. So I love The Martian. It's a great movie. It definitely brings out the geek in me, the space geek. But I don't know if you've read it, Manos or Brian, but it is. It just occurred to me that the whole movie is about problem solving, going from one, and the whole book, right? The book is about. It gets into real technical details about being stuck on Mars by yourself and how you're gonna make sure you have enough oxygen, enough water. So it's really getting through a series of problems, not dissimilar to getting stuck in the middle of a case and having to negotiate several issues that you run into in every case, and how you're going to, tackle it. And if X fails, how are you going to go to Y? But that's my favorite right now. Yeah. So until I find a new favorite.
Perfect. And how about you, Brian? Any favorite movie?
Yeah, I watched quite a few movies. I'm a binge watcher for different series of, different TV series. So I always like when things are kind of dumped, in mass on Netflix and things. And so I try to decompress by watching various things, in the different streaming services. I think I have them all on my apps, and so I try to watch most of those are movies when I'm exercising, and so um, not a single one stands out as a favorite, but I'm a consumer and of media for sure to kind of decompress also.
And then what are you, you're both obviously very technically savvy. What are you most excited about going forward, both in terms of CTO or otherwise?
Yeah, I think we're in the golden age of interventional cardiology right now. I said earlier that I when I first got out, I was like, man, are we in the wrong field? But when I look around at what we're doing now with technology as far as shock, as far as PE, peripheral, which I used to do more peripheral than I do now, just so busy in the coronary. But watching some of my vascular surgery colleagues and interventional colleagues and what they're doing with limb salvage, really feel like the field is moving so fast right now that it's really probably the more exciting thing that I can think of. I was like, wow, I am in the right field for sure. And just it's so funny how fast things change. I tell people that the job you take now, whether you're in the same position like I am or whether you move somewhere else, is not going to be the job you have in 10 years. And if I just look back over the last 10 years and the different tracks that we've taken and the things that I'm doing now are completely different than what I signed up for initially. And so I think that's one of the best parts of medicine in general. And so it's just exciting to kind of think, wow, look at where things are going. And, everybody coming out is so well trained with these different subtract fellowships that we're doing in cardiology. We just started a CICU program at our hospital that, is changed. It's in a private hospital, so it's, a dedicated CICU, and just looking at our shock and a mechanical support and LVAD program that's developed over the last couple of years. It's just, I think, an all around exciting time of kind of where things are moving.
Yeah, I would have to piggyback on that. Brian and I talked about this several times when we were starting the program, which is that, when we came out of fellowship, structural wasn't really a thing yet. Like, there were barely any structural fellowships. Maybe there was one started, or they were contemplating starting a structural fellowship. So neither of us are structural trained. You were cool, or you were different, or you were more marketable, or you had extra skills if you did peripherals, if you did legs. That was it. Otherwise, you were just a balloon and stent guy. And if you're having a really long day, you would roto for fun, or something, or because you had and that was it. That was, that was the nature. And we didn't really know how to use Impella. And just looking back at the just crazy growth and expansion of our field, we really came out when interventional cardiology was kind of like, kind of at a nadir, at a kind of a low point, ready to explode and ready to just take on all these new things in the last 10 years. And it's been really fun to be part of that. I feel like an old guy when I tell these young folks who come out and they're so well trained, they've already done like 50 Impellas, and I'm like, you guys didn't know back in my day, we had to learn all this stuff in practice, and had to learn on the fly. You guys all get trained by really good operators now, so it's really fascinating.
And what are you most proud of in the things that you've achieved so far?
Our group, I think, when I just look around, I'm blown away by the development of the group that I'm, a part of. I joined like 5 people to start the group, and now, like I said, across the city, it's 40, and we were reading echoes at the hospital we started on VHS when I came out, and now we're putting LVADs in and taking care of some of the sickest patients that we actually used to send out. And so really have developed a quaternary care referral program. And every time we hire somebody, the mantra is hire somebody that's better than you. And unfortunately, we're multiple iterations into that. So now when we talk about better than me, 5x or down the road, I'm just blown away by everybody coming out, how excited and passionate they are. I learn constantly from all of kind of the new people coming in. And so I just kind of look around our office and the community that's developed and around the hospital. I feel like I've been at least a part of that, and watching other people kind of take off and succeed. And I just think that's a cool thing every day that I get to watch.
Yeah. I think, I would agree. It's just, I think the thing that I was, most proud of is just the kind of evolution over the last 10 years. And, I think it's easy to, let your skill set become stale, to, not evolve, to just kind of do the simple stuff and get in and get out. And, I think something Bill Lombardi says a lot, which is, every year, every couple of years, pick something that you aren't doing well and focus on it for 6 months or a year. And I think we really took that to heart. And I can remember clearly going down to one of the first, just courses that you guys all had, you, Bill, Tony, Aaron, all the guys who were giving all these courses to folks. We'd sit in the audience and then we'd watch you guys do a few cases. And, I just said to myself, man, if I can ever get to the point where I'm reasonably comfortable with retrogrades, I'll know that, okay, I've arrived. And that Brian and I left that markers. We're so far beyond that. And again, not to toot your own horn, you're still learning. We're still learning, evolving, getting better. And that's the beauty of it. That's what I'm proud of, is like, we've tackled something that's super complex. And now I think, this is relatively straightforward, or we got through this case or we got through a CTO that was a right, and we just did integrated wire with reentry. And I was like, this is a cool case, but that's kind of one of the more simple cases we have. And you have to kind of stop and think, man, 10 years ago, that would have been super daunting. And I would have been like, man, if I could ever do this case, then I'll be something. And, I'm there. So, it's that, just being proud of the evolution personally for Brian and myself for building that program. That's, I'm still proud of helping to build that program there. And that really allowed me to kind of come here and kind of start taking a program that was reasonably established to the next level. And then just constantly learning, constantly reminding yourself that even though you think you're that good, you still can be better.
So if you have to give any last piece of advice for the people who are starting, who are early in their careers, and they want to emulate what you guys did, what would you offer them?
I would say, sorry, I'll start with this one, and then I'll let you take over. So I think, there's two things. And I think that, it's, I see this with with some of my younger colleagues occasionally, and they're all so well trained nowadays. But I think two things: be patient and be humble. Be patient in that, I think a lot of folks who want to come out, they just want to come out and do 100 CTOs a year, and it's just, that's not reality. You have to build and get to that point. So that's where the patience comes in. Just every time taking care of the patient, doing the right thing by the patient, and just having the patience to let your practice build and grow. And then just be humble and ask for help from somebody who's done it a little longer than you. Be humble and know your limits. It's good to push the envelope. It's good to challenge yourself, but it's also important to remember that there's a real person in front of you. And if there's somebody who's been doing it longer and is in a further place in their career, then use them, especially if they're easily accessible.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Clearly, I think one tidbit is that Twitter's not necessarily reality. We might put that out there just to kind of say that initially.
Right.
But I do think be aware of what your patients need. I think kind of CTO really is a field where there's a very large population of really patients that were struggling and really weren't treated well. And, highest risk, highest reward kind of field sometimes really can make the biggest difference, for the patients. And so I think be aware of what your patients are needing, because there may be kind of that next step of, the iterations of what we already do of trying to help, patients. But I do think be humble and be patient. It's a pretty sage advice there. As you develop a program, there are no perfect jobs out there, but there are some really, really good ones and some really, really bad ones. And, do a little bit of education before you dive in, but don't get frustrated with things that everybody else kind of go through, and tap into your resources, I think is a pretty good way to start for sure.
Well, thank you both again so much. Congrats of having built a great program. I'm sorry that your roads have parted, but it looks like you're still in close touch, which is, pretty much a testament to what a great relationship and how you can help with the program and everything else. So thanks so much again. Thanks for everything. And again, super excited to work with you on multiple projects.
Yeah. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, Manos. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Sensei podcast.